Welcome to the Fatigue Files, a podcast that explores fatigue conditions from as many angles as possible while pushing the boundaries of thinking about fatigue as a signal to the 21st century and beyond. Cutting-edge thinking, practical strategies, thought-provoking explorations. They're going to all be here, and I'm your host, Anna Greer, welcoming you to this edition of the Fatigue Files. Hello everyone and welcome, and I'm delighted to have with me today Dr Evan Hirsch, a bit of a legend frankly, who works on Fix Your Fatigue, is known as the Energy MD with very good reason, and he does some beautiful things on YouTube, gorgeous little shots from his car where he talks about a theme related to fatigue recovery, and I highly recommend following his work. So Evan, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me on, Anna.
Oh, it's delightful to have you on, Evan. So one of the things I'm really keen to talk about today is I really want to kind of contextualize some of the things that we're seeing in the recovery, the fatigue recovery field at the moment. Lots and lots of programs and coaches sprouting up, doing brain retraining and autonomic nervous system retraining, which is hugely valuable, hugely powerful. Mm-hmm. But there's sometimes a sense that that's kind of what you need to do, and if you do that, you will recover. And I'm just not convinced that that's the whole story. And I know that you take a much more multi-layered approach. So I would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that, when we're looking at all of the different causes of fatigue, there's over 30 plus causes that we're looking at right now. And everybody that we see has a combination of 20 of those causes or so. And so the question is, how much is nervous system dysfunction? How much is vagal toxicity? How much is negative emotional patterns that can be remedied by a number of these limbic system or amygdala retraining programs? And so for some people, it's 10% of the problem. And for some people, it's 90% of the problem, right? And so we just don't know. And so I think that it's valuable. We have a mindset component in our program. We've got an emotional and limbic system component in our program. It's not a trauma curriculum. It's not like these other trainings. So we offer some support. But if people want to go deeper, we do recommend some of these other programs. So it is a really important part of this. The question is how much. Now, most of the people that we see, much like you, if they have done those programs, they're helpful, but they're not everything. And I know that some of the founders of those programs actually had a lot of success getting rid of some of their toxicities, heavy metals, chemicals, molds, and infections. And then doing the nervous system retraining was kind of the cherry on top of the ice cream that kind of brought it all together. So I think you have to take this multi-pronged approach.
Yeah. So can you sort of speculate on, like, obviously it's highly individual, but you'll be getting a sense of patterns because you're seeing so many people. What would you think would be the average percentage, if that's an intelligent question, it might not be, of people who are going to get a very significant recovery from autonomic nervous system work and people who just won't and who really need to go into the other layers?
So, so I would say, it runs a gamut, but I would say in terms of, to answer your question specifically, which is who is going to get a significant improvement, I would say it's 10% of people. I would say that I would say 80% of people are going to get some improvement, but it can be, okay, you can tolerate one more food, or it can be up to your energy jumps a couple of points, so it really runs the gamut, but I would say it's a small percentage that gets a really significant boost.
Right. So what I'm hearing from you there is a very different message that comes out sometimes on some of those YouTube videos about people who have resettled their autonomic nervous system and got 100% recovery. what you're saying is very different. It's a very different picture.
Yeah, and when you're taking a look at it's it's very possible that the people that I attract are going to be people who are, I mean, a lot of them are doing this work already and they're kind of coming to see me, but my population is obviously going to be skewed, and the people that those people are going to be working with is going to be skewed. And obviously, as a practitioner, if I went through one of those programs and I got 100% better, that would be the work that I would bring out into the world. And since that was my experience, that's what I would be telling people. Like my experience when I had chronic fatigue was that I had to get rid of all these toxins, the heavy metals, the chemicals, the molds, the infections, and the other 30 plus causes that I had. And mindset and emotions were a big part of it, but it was probably about 10%, so yeah, I think we all come from different realms. And I think in terms of, I'm kind of hedging a little bit, because the idea of, okay, let's say that, 1 million people, if we take a population of 1 million people who have fatigue, what's the number? And, my opinion is going to be skewed.
Yeah, I guess everyone's is, but then I guess that's when the research evidence comes in handy. Are you aware of sufficient research into these kind of parameters about the kind of relative recovery rates for different approaches? Is there such research out there?
There is research, but not necessarily related to chronic fatigue. So, there's, the polyvagal theory and the limbic and the amygdala. So there is research on that, but I haven't seen it necessarily applied as much as I would like to mast cell activation, to chronic fatigue, to fibromyalgia. So I don't have a sense of how much research is actually going on in those fields right now. But it would be, I hope that there's going to be more soon.
Yeah, and are you aware of any research that does a kind of meta perspective on the kind of comparative strength of different approaches and success rates? Are you aware of that kind of research?
I'm not. And the challenge is, because people ask me this, they're like, okay, well, tell us about the research on your program. And it's like, well, the challenge is, I have right now about 70 people in a number of our different programs, and they all have different protocols because they all have different causes. I mean, there's probably some overlap with some of them, but when we're looking at 39 different causes and people are showing up with about a combination of 20 causes, and they all have a different 20 causes, and their progression is different, it doesn't fit into the scientific model. And so consequently, then doing that kind of research is really challenging from a conventional perspective. And so what we're doing instead is we're documenting people's success going through our program, realizing that, yes, this is an individualized functional medicine and environmental medicine program, but it just doesn't fit into the scientific model otherwise.
So what I'm hearing there is the real importance of understanding complexity and understanding mutability, because the complexity is moving, isn't it? It's not just that you've got 30 different causes, but they're going to have different impacts and intensities in any individual patient, depending on their own particular life story, their own particular genetics, their own particular patterns of susceptibility. So we're really talking about the importance, the central importance of understanding that this is complex.
Yeah, and it can be overwhelming to hear that there's over 30 causes that an individual has, because they were thinking it was just Epstein-Barr, or it was just Lyme, or it was just mold, or it was just B12, right? And so that can be a bit overwhelming, but you're absolutely right. It's always a combination of genetics plus environment, and we all have different genetics and we all have different environments that we grow up with. And this really is what we're looking at, is the total body burden that's happened since you left the womb. We actually leave the womb having a bunch of toxins. There are studies on 280 some odd different chemicals are found in cord blood now. This was probably about 10 years ago, so it's probably even more than it was, right? And so there's just, and then it just builds up over time. We get a number of stressors, and everybody's story is going to be different.
And peeling apart those layers is presumably quite a complex, nuanced process.
It can be. Fortunately, of those different 30 plus causes that we're looking at, 75% of those can be determined by symptoms alone. So we actually have, I have people come through with me one-on-ones where I do that process for them. And then we also have people who are in our group and courses where we give them questionnaires to go through, and they're able to determine most of their causes. And then they're able to get the labs that for the 25% that require the labs, they're able to see the abnormalities. They're able to start protocols that are individual for those. So it's kind of a little bit like a decision tree where if you understand the symptoms and you understand the diagnostic criteria, the data that's needed in order to determine something, and you're able to get that, then you can say, okay, well, then this is the most likely supplement you're going to need. If that's not working for you, then you can pivot to this one over here. But for the most part, you're kind of matching up, okay, which are the causes that you have, which these are the supplements that I recommend for those causes. And then there's the nuances beyond that that need the tweaking and the hand holding.
So what I'm hearing there is how seriously you take the material dynamics of it, the kind of intelligences involved in the body systems, the agency of viruses, the agency of molds. It's not as if you're saying there's one size fits all approach. You're actually plugging into the kind of reality of the complexity of materiality itself in this process.
We're trying. And a lot of this is the focus on the causes. A lot of people are really focused on treatments. They're like, oh, I'm going to get that high dose IV vitamin C or ozone or B12 shot or whatever. And they're forgetting, do you have that deficiency? Do you have that cause? Right. So bringing that focus back to the causes is really allowing us to have the most amount of success, because if you leave no stone unturned, you're going to be a lot more successful. I've never met anybody who has found all of their causes and worked on those causes and didn't get better. Right.
Yeah.
It just makes sense.
And is it really, in that sense, a process of elimination?
I think of a process of elimination as being, we don't know what this is, and so we're going to say it must be this other thing. While in reality, I would say that we're determining which of the causes there are, essentially making diagnoses, determinations about what is actually present, what is deficient in the body and what is toxic in the body, or what is in the body that's not supposed to be there. So whenever I look at these causes, I divide them up into deficiencies and toxicities, because once we know what those are, then we can replace the deficiencies and we can remove the toxins. So it's I would consider it to be very specific in that regard. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. It does. And if you had, I'm aware of the complexity of this and the fact you rightly imply that could be overwhelming to someone, right? Actually dealing with the complexity can be overwhelming. I think understanding that it is complex is a really helpful thing, because if you're given an answer that sounds overly simplistic and you don't get better, that can be a real problem. Mm-hmm. So understanding that it is complex, I think, is an important educational fact to face up to. But then actually dealing with the complexity is a different matter, obviously. So where would you advise someone, Evan, if they were feeling a bit overwhelmed by the complexity of it? They've got, oh yeah, I know it's complex. I understand that there's a lot going on here. Where would you recommend would be the first basic steps to start engaging with that in a way that feels manageable and isn't necessarily expensive?
Yeah. So the first steps would be to kind of take a look at all of those different causes, and I can list them off right now, or they can go onto our website and they can watch the videos that we have where we kind of list them out. But the biggest things that people can do right now are lifestyle modifications. It's making sure that you don't have deficiencies in sleep, so that you're getting enough sleep, you're going to bed closer to 9 than you are to 10 or 11, that you're getting 7 to 9 hours of good sleep at night, that your room is dark, that you're getting good food as well, that you're avoiding gluten, dairy, sugar, and alcohol. Those are really the big 4 that we recommend that people remove out of their diets. We see the biggest jump in energy from that when it comes to food. We want to make sure that people are getting their Goldilocks dose of movement. And so if you are really tired and you can't move at all, that's okay. But if you can, the question is, how much movement can you do without feeling worse? that day or the next day. So we call that the Goldilocks dose of movement. And then there's the amount of water that you need to be consuming. So pretty much everybody who's going through any sort of detoxification or removal of toxins out of the body needs to be consuming about 3 liters of water a day. And oftentimes they also need to be adding some salt to that water in order to support their adrenals as well. So that's water, food, movement, sleep. Those are kind of a lot of the big lifestyle stuff. And then mindset. We have a free handout on our website about creating your own daily mindset practice. But this is a huge part of the work that we do, because it really takes a specific mindset in order to get better when you're not feeling well. So it's kind of this combination of having gratitude for where you are and acceptance for where you are, and then also a vision for where you want to go and a plan for how to get there. And there's so much negative self-talk that we get, and when you're not feeling well, it gets even worse. And so remembering every single morning when you wake up to go through this mindset practice, and people are just more successful.
Okay, so one thing you didn't mention there, and I'd love your thoughts on, is light exposure. I know it's related to circadian hygiene, but I was thinking like sunlight exposure during the day from the point of view of cellular activity, stimulating mitochondrial function and things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the longer list includes light exposure and laughing every day, doing something fun every day, right? But yeah, absolutely. And we don't entirely, and it doesn't necessarily have to be light. It's about going outside, right? And so yes, even if you're in Alaska and it's in the middle of winter, you're still going to want to try to go outside in the morning best you can. It's an awful example, but yes, you're absolutely correct. And there's a lot of magic to being outside of the home.
Yeah. So let's unpack the circadian thing a bit more, because I know that's absolutely pivotal. I think it's called the mother of all health issues, isn't it? It's absolutely key, circadian hygiene. So I'd love you to unpack that a bit more and explore that, the practicalities of that.
Now, what's interesting about this, the circadian rhythm that you're talking about, is that, we want, ideally, we have certain hormones and certain nutrients that are higher in the morning that end up giving us the energy we need and that come down throughout the day. A number of these, so the biggest ones are what I call the big 3, and this is adrenals, mitochondria, and thyroid. So the adrenals are a little triangular gland, sit on top of the kidneys. They're responsible for producing a number of hormones. The biggest one is cortisol, which manages our get up and go in the morning. It manages our stress. So any sort of stressor that you have, whether it's mental, emotional, or physical, like having heavy metals, chemicals, molds, or infections in the body, the cortisol needs to manage, and so you produce more cortisol. It manages insulin and blood sugars and a number of other things. And so consequently, when you have chronic stress, your cortisol goes down. And so then consequently, you end up getting cortisol dysfunction. And so you don't have this really nice curve in the morning of cortisol starts to increase at about midnight, it peaks at about 6 a.m., and then it comes down throughout the day. So then it kind of looks like this. And so then you're crashing throughout the day. And then the same thing is happening at night. So then you're crashing throughout the night. So I had somebody I was on the call with the other day, and so she said, I'm awake every night at 3 a.m. And I said, so you're probably crashing every day at 3 p.m. And she said, that's exactly right. And it's because the body and the brain are confused about what your normal circadian rhythm is. So you have to recreate that. And so part of that is like some of the things that you're talking about, going outside first thing in the morning, doing some breath work, doing some stretches, doing what you can to kind of wake up the body, and then certain techniques in order to relax the body in the evening. And then we just support those things with the supplements that are needed in order to make the process happen a lot faster. So we talked about adrenals. The mitochondria is the energy center of every cell in the body, except for red blood cells, produces 70 to 90% of our energy, and it gets squashed by heavy metals, chemicals, molds, and infections, and trauma. I call those the root causes that we've been talking about today. So those squash the mitochondria, so we have to remove those off the mitochondria, but then in the interim, we're also boosting mitochondrial function, increasing the number of mitochondria to increase the energy. And then the last thing, as part of that big 3, is thyroid. Where 95% of the people who we see who have low thyroid have been underdiagnosed and undertreated. So people are like, I still have low thyroid symptoms, but my doc says that my labs are normal. And unfortunately, all labs are imperfect, and especially thyroid labs if you're not looking at them correctly. And so we do a subjective ramp up and get people up to their ideal dose of thyroid because then everything works better. It's a great anti-inflammatory, it lowers cholesterol, it improves energy. So that's kind of part of the technique that we use for, there might be more than you wanted to hear, but that's kind of how we address the circadian
So,
rhythm.
what lifestyle practices specifically could people take on? Okay, we've spoken about getting out in the morning. Presumably things like watching the sunset, wearing red light glasses, not eating late at night. I mean, what kind of list of things would you advise people to do to get really sharp circadian discipline and great circadian hygiene?
Yep. So going to sleep at the same time every night, waking up at the same time every day. Ideally, that's going to look something like 9:30 at night to 6 o'clock in the morning, um, depending on who you are and the number of hours that you need. And you can tell how many hours you need based off of if you get a good night of sleep, and if you see you're getting it in 2 hour chunks or hour and a half chunks, that'll kind of give you an idea about what your sleep cycles are. So if it's like eight hours versus 7.5 hours, we'll tell you that information. um, we talked about getting out in the morning, getting light exposure. Breath work is a really important part of this. I did my yoga teacher training back in 2004, and now breath work is kind of like all the rage. And I'm starting to incorporate it more into my programs. And there's different kinds of breath work, but just doing like a 4-7-8 breath where you're taking a deep breath in for 4, you're holding it for 7, and then you're releasing for 8, and then you're repeating. Doing those breath holds can be really powerful and really nourishing for the vagal tone, the vagus nerve that oftentimes can have toxicity. So doing that in the morning can be really helpful. And then there's a more advanced stuff like doing some rapid breathing or doing some stomach pumping in order to be supportive of that. Drinking water first thing in the morning in order to get things moving, doing stretches. And then in the evening, dark room, like you said, the less you eat into the evening. So generally not eating anything after 6 p.m. usually works better for most people. Avoiding alcohol, that'll really ding your score. I use an Oura ring. And so it gives me really interesting data on some of this stuff. You don't have to have anything like that, but it's good to see, okay, actually my sleep window is usually between this and this. Oftentimes, the people who we work with who have chronic fatigue, because their circadian rhythm is dysfunctional, they actually get a second wind 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. And they're like, that's when I get all my stuff done, because I've been feeling like crap the rest of the day. And so part of this, you have to recreate that. And unfortunately, you have to start backing down and trying to get your sleep window back into about 9 o'clock or so. And if you find that you're yawning into the evening, you've just about missed your sleep window. So you need to time it correctly so that, okay, maybe about a half an hour before that, you need to get into bed. So playing around with the times can definitely be helpful. Making sure that there are no pets or children that are going to wake you up in the middle of the night. Children, it's a bit harder. But if you do have a parent who does not have fatigue, having them manage the child. But it's amazing with pets. Yes, I love my cats as well, but they go behind the door in the kitchen, so they're not in our bedrooms. They're not disrupting our sleep. Um, and there's something, so for some people who are waking up in the middle of the night, and oftentimes that's accompanied with anxiety. And oftentimes the anxiety is, oh, crud, I am now awake at 3 a.m. again for the fourth night in a row, and I'm not going to be able to fall back asleep. But starting to do your mindset practice at that point, having gratitude. There's something that this illness is teaching you. I know it's really hard to see right now, but it's teaching you to slow down. It's teaching you all these things that you would never have learned without having it, unfortunately. But so doing some mindset stuff, doing some meditation, maybe listening to something like a podcast that's fun for you if you know that you're absolutely not going to be able to fall back asleep. So making that time more enjoyable for you, but in a way that is going to allow you to, fall back asleep when the time is right. So, trying not to put any fuel on that fire of anxiety when it happens in the middle of the night. So those are just some of the techniques. And then avoiding EMF, so turning off your modem at night. And you can put them on a timer so that they go off when it's time to go to bed. And making sure that there's nothing that's attached to the walls that, like my daughter's room is on the other side of my office. And so I make sure that my entire setup here with my computer, my printer and everything goes off before she goes into bed. I also have used a Stetzerizer to actually take a look at all of the outlets in the home to determine if we have any dirty electricity that's coming into the home. Making sure that your phones are in airplane mode if they are going to be next to you at night, and keeping them as far away from your head as possible when you go to bed. So you asked for the long list. I could probably talk about more. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, very helpful and very, very practical. Mitochondrial biogenesis. You mentioned earlier how you want to multiply and build up mitochondria. Now, was I right in sensing that would be supplement driven in your program, or do you do other things like cold water exposure, heat, and other things, movement at the right stage of recovery, obviously, because sometimes people don't have the metabolic energy to exercise, as you say, without a post-exertional malaise or feeling worse. But how do you approach mitochondrial biogenesis?
Yeah, it's largely with supplementation. We incorporate the practices, so I do recommend the cold water plunges. I myself change to cold water on the top of my head at the end of every single shower until I can't stand it. And so I do believe that those are very important, but a lot of the people who are coming into our program are kind of burnt out on a lot of lifestyle modification, and they're also too tired to make those modifications. So it needs to be kind of a combination. And like you said, in terms of any sort of hormesis or there's ways to stimulate the body by exercising that will increase mitochondrial function. But the challenge is that it also stresses the body. And so that's that post-exertional malaise that people get, where once again, you have to find your Goldilocks dose of movement. Otherwise, you're going to feel worse, right? So, and then you can't build your mitochondria, and then it seems like a catch-22. So yes, we absolutely will utilize supplements to when people can't do the lifestyle management. And what we find too is that those lifestyle modifications are very helpful, but the supplements kind of take them to the next level.
So which supplements would you be using to help people build their mitochondrial health?
So there's a combination, but some of the ones that can be helpful are acetyl L-carnitine, D-ribose, CoQ10. I like the CellCore products. You're going to want to have a multi-mineral that's also going to help your mitochondria. Those are some of the ones we use.
So I just want to fold this bit of the conversation about mitochondrial function and needing a certain level of health to push without making self-worth back into our conversation about circadian hygiene. Because back in the day, there was a British doctor who was an ME specialist who always used to say to ME patients, don't get up before noon. And quite a lot of people will complain that they can't get up early because they don't have the metabolic health to get up early. So that's quite a challenge. So how would you advise people to titrate themselves towards the healthy circadian pattern of, the 9:30 bedtime, 6 o'clock waking, moving and light to give the body the signal that the day's begun? How would you advise people to titrate towards that when they're in a phase when they feel that they really can't get up early, and so their circadian pattern is quite blunted? How do you work with that, Evan?
So this is a perfect example of where supplements are really helpful. So because they're not able to do it on their own. And so sometimes I'll have people wake up at 8 o'clock in the morning, take the big three that I talked about, the adrenals, the mitochondria, and thyroid, maybe some B12, and go back to bed if they have to go back to bed. Sometimes I'll just have them do it when they first wake up in the morning. But once they start to take those supplements, then the morning times just get earlier and earlier, and it's just easier for them to wake up over time. It can take a couple of months, but it happens.
So that's a clear example then of really taking the kind of materiality of the situation seriously by going in at the cellular and the kind of biochemical function level of the body to assist the person to actually make the lifestyle change.
Absolutely. And it's, we're not We're not giving them things that their body doesn't already normally produce. It's just there's deficiencies in these. And so we're not supra loading them like beyond normal. If this is normal, we're just bringing them from deficient back up to normal so that for normal function.
And am I right, Evan, in thinking that you do that before you do detoxification because the body needs to be strong enough to handle the detox processes? Is that right?
You're speaking my language. Yeah. So we have a 4-step process. First step is figuring out the causes that somebody has, and we've talked about that. Second step is to replace the deficiencies. And so that's the big three. That's deficiencies in vitamins and minerals, lifestyle habits. Step 3 is to open up the drainage pathways, opening liver and kidney and lymph and neurolymph in the brain, gallbladder, intestines, so that when you go into step 4 and you start removing heavy metals, chemicals, molds, and infections as a detoxification, then they actually have a place to go. Otherwise, if you haven't done step 3 and you haven't done step 2, you start removing some of these toxins, and everybody's got a story about this where I got this antimicrobial, or I took this thing that was trying to pull this thing out of my body and I felt like crap and it set me back months, right? And it's because it's stressful removing these things out of the body. They're ensconced. They're in there, and in order to remove them and to extricate them, you need to make sure that they have a place to go. And so that's what we do step 3 for, and that you can deal with the stress of that by making sure that you've got the replacement of those deficiencies in step 2.
And presumably, if you don't do that and they've got nowhere to go, you're just shaking them up in the body. And they're going to sites where perhaps they're even going to do more damage than they originally did. I have in mind here releasing toxins from fat through sweating, and then that might kind of just move around the body and possibly even to the brain, and then you've got like crap going down.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what detoxification protocols do you recommend that are like a straightforward that people can do? I mean, obviously you can do things like sauning, but not everyone has access to those kind of facilities. So what could someone do at a very simple level, again, lifestyle wise, to begin detoxification once they're confident that their body's been adequately supported with the nutrients it needs and that it's functioning at that, the requisite level before starting to do that?
So from a lifestyle perspective, it's drinking more water. It's removing toxic foods from your diet, removing gluten, dairy, sugar, alcohol. And those by itself are going to make a world of difference for folks. Well, I should say it's important to remember too that a lot of the people listening to this have probably done some of those things, and you're like, yeah, it didn't really help me out that much. And the reality is that if you've got these 20 different causes that we're talking about, food is one of them, and it's a total body burden that we're looking at. And so if you think about these as nails in the bottom of the foot, if you have 20 nails in the bottom of your foot and we remove the gluten nail and the sugar nail, like you're going to feel a little bit better, but it still hurts to walk, right? And you still got these other things. And so sometimes it's 10%, sometimes it's 50%, so it really depends on the number of other causes that somebody has, but it's definitely worth your while to do that. So water, food, cleaning up your air, but that's going to cost with like air filters and stuff. But you can make sure that, you can maybe purchase a Eufy or a Roomba that would potentially go around your house and take care of a lot of the dust. That doesn't require a lot of work on your part. So that might be a good investment for cleaning up your air and your environment.
I love the sound of that. A robot doing my work. I love it.
I know, right? And then there's, the cleanliness of the water. And it's been so interesting the last couple of years to kind of have that in my purview and seeing how many people are really being toxified or are accumulating toxins just from the water supply. And you can go to ewg.org/tapwater, and you can put in your zip code and you can see how many toxins are actually coming through in high levels. And so I've been recommending water distillations, It's not cheap, it's $750, but it can make a big difference for folks as well. But we're talking about, and then organic food when you can. So that's, less pesticides, not storing your food in any plastics or using a microwave to heat up anything with plastic or using a microwave at all. Let's see. So that's water, that's food, mindset, removing toxic relationships and toxic thoughts. And so we have this 4-step mindset practice that I keep alluding to, where you're doing gratitudes every day. You're having a vision for what you want your life to be like. You're looking at any sort of limiting beliefs and expressing and flipping them on their head and expressing empowering beliefs and affirmations to yourself. And then you're asking yourself really empowering questions. So that's the 4 steps that we take people through. So that's a mental detox. So those are some of the things that we do. I'm sure I'm missing some. We have a big workbook that we have in the program that stores a lot of the things that I learned that I just can't remember at the moment.
And what I love about this, Evan, is I love the fact that it's so multi-layered. I love it because I absolutely believe that these conditions are multifactorial and very complex, and that understanding that's really important. And I think understanding that means that when you don't get a result from one factor, you know that there are other factors, and it can kind of help you frame it in a way that helps you relax about the fact that you haven't got the result from the one thing you help to get the result from. And if you understand that it's a kind of complex systems theoretical kind of approach, there will be tipping points. There will be system tipping points. There will be things that have a pivotal effect that kind of put the thing on a feedback loop, which is much more helpful and productive. And I think knowing that, and knowing that not everything you do will provide a tipping point, but the effect is cumulative over time, I think is really helpful, because it allows you to become much more patient and accepting of the complexity. And in that process, as you said earlier, you learn things that you wouldn't have otherwise learned. You learn about the body as this manifestation of multiple intelligences, which are all working in potent ways, constantly seeking health and homeostasis. And it's almost a sense in which we need to just understand and work with the body, come into partnership with the body, with this understanding of all the layers involved, and to be committed to that process in a way that isn't impatient, isn't looking for the next shift, but actually just trusts the process.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. And that's one of the things that's really a learning edge for a lot of people in the program, and I understand. I tell them when they join, I say, I know that you want to get better yesterday. But the reality is that when you find out that you've got heavy metals, chemicals, molds, and infections that are in your body, and they're going to take a year to get better, and this is what we're going to do in order to get better, like, it makes so much sense to people, and it allows them to exhale and to relax and to understand that there is this process, and there is this reason why they don't feel well. And in reality, I would say most of the people in our program have 3 out of 4 of those in significant numbers: heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infection, and then of course trauma. So yeah, that's such an important part of this, and it's something that I'm working on right now in order to be able to share that better with people, so that they can understand like what this process really looks like. Because a lot of people come to us and they're so used to doing their research, and they're like grabbing this, grabbing that, the other thing. So now what they're doing is now they're bouncing those things off of me, and they're saying, well, what do you think about monolaurin for Lyme? What do you think about this for this? What do you think about this for this? And it's like, trust the process. And then they think I'm being dismissive. So it's kind of like, okay, yes, I'm going to answer your question. And what you have to realize is that this is the big picture. The other thing too is to let people know, like, the gold in this program is step 4, removing the toxins. And that's really where you're going to get the biggest long-term effect. But the reality is that in order to be able to get there, we got to set up the first couple of months. And so first 3 months, all of our programs are a year long at least. And that's because the first couple of months are setting things up in step 1, 2, and 3. And people will notice a significant uptick when they introduce the big 3 in step 2. But, that's just for now. But in terms of the long-term picture, you may not notice a really significant improvement in your energy until you're at month 9 or 12 or 18. It really depends on the number of those causes that they have, the severity of those, and then people's reaction to treatment.
Yeah, and then finding the tipping point that makes the big difference. When you get sufficient number of tipping points in the right direction, then you get into a virtuous feedback cycle rather than the vicious one that you were in to start with. And I'm also struck again, Evan, by the way you framed this as a lifelong thing, that, fetuses in the womb are now exposed to very high toxic loads. We come into the world, we're not clean in that sense. And while we experience perhaps getting ill in a particular crisis, there'll be a tipping point in a life where, you catch the virus at the time that your marriage is breaking down, and that's why you never recover and things go from bad to worse from there. There are those moments. But when you look back with understanding, I think probably 100% of the time, you can actually see long durée feed-ins that go right back through a life. So it might be adverse childhood experiences, trauma. It might be toxic exposures as a kid to a particular chemical. It might be epigenetic inheritance, whatever. But it seems to me that it's very easy to think that we get ill quickly and we get better quickly, whereas actually we're actually looking at much longer time frames in both respects, aren't we? Unless we're very lucky.
Exactly. And the classic or the perfect example of this nowadays is COVID and long COVID. People are like, well, why did I get long COVID? Why did I get COVID? And then I got these persistent symptoms that aren't going away. And the reality is that they also have heavy metals, chemicals, molds, and other infections and trauma that inform them. And COVID was just the straw that broke the camel's back. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, how COVID landed in the population, because there were certain patterns that were clearly identifiable in terms of the worst outcomes. I mean, there was a lot of talk, for example, I think Dr. Sarah Myhill was saying recently that there was a very strong link, for example, between diabetes and bad COVID outcomes. Now, I don't know where she drew that from, but that's one of her, she's a British ME specialist, that's one of her observations. But there's that question of what's the virus landing on? Like what's the pre-existing condition of the system into which that virus is entering?
Exactly.
And it's very easy to overlook that. And it's very easy to think that someone's healthy because they're fit. And in my experience, they're not the same thing at all.
Exactly. And a lot of this can be described kind of, at least in terms of, it's simplified in terms of immune system dysfunction. So when you have heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, and trauma, the immune system is dysfunctional and it can't manage anything that comes into the body. So COVID comes into the body and it bypasses the immune system. The immune system isn't able to get rid of it. A lot of people will say, well, I barely had any symptoms. And actually, if you have 5 mild symptoms, you're actually a lot more likely to get long COVID than if you have like a full-blown flu. And a lot of that is because it's bypassing the immune system. The immune system is what causes us to get those symptoms, to try to expel this particular virus, but it's often left field. And here are these infections that are all opportunistic, and you have to have a somewhat intact immune system in order to be able to get rid of these infections.
Yeah. So the overall message then, I suppose, is a multi-layered, committed lifestyle that goes back to the fundamentals of human well-being, to live that way, at every level, physiologically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, to practice living in ways that really enhance one's capacity for health, one's capacity for recovery when we encounter viruses that attack the system and all that. And to understand that there is a real need just for that bedrock commitment to well-being.
Absolutely. And when you say it like that, it sounds really overwhelming. So I'll remind people that, as humans, we overestimate the amount we can get done in a day, and we underestimate the amount we can get done in a year. Right. And so this is really just about baby steps, and it's about doing exactly what you say, where we're looking at water and air and food and mindset and lifestyle, and what are your daily practices that enable you to live the most beautiful life. And so but it's adding one thing in every month, every couple of months, and so that it is manageable. And I so appreciate you saying that, because it is that big picture of adding in these practices.
And for me, one thought I'm having a lot at the moment, Evan, I'd love to get your response to it, is I think healing is more than recovery. So for me, this journey, and I've been on this particular little dance for 32 years odd, for me, the journey has been profoundly about deep healing, not just recovery. Recovery is great, and I have massively recovered. But the real value in it has been understanding healing, which is really coming home to the things you're talking about, the kind of fundamental creaturely basics of being a human being at this particular point in history, and the deeper capacities that we have for spiritual growth, evolution, doing the inner work, releasing the emotional toxins, letting go of the old stories and their effects in our bodies, and just really opening to the body's capacity for recovery and its love of all the things that bring well-being, all the things we evolved alongside, like really good plant foods and, fantastic sunlight and beautiful hydration and all that sort of stuff. To me, that's the deepest journey.
Yeah, it's the reason why we're here. I talk a lot about the physical, but the spiritual journey really is I believe the reason why we're on this earth, and our personal evolution. And this is just a tool that we get to use. It's a tool that I've used, in order to be able to go through my own personal journey, mindset, emotional. I have a trauma therapist who I work with, so it's really important work.
It is, isn't it? It's really, really deeply important work. And I would say the same, Evan. I think the reason we're here actually is really profoundly to be part of the evolution of consciousness itself, and to show up as loving, compassionate, ethical, wise human beings who have the capacity to heal and reach out and touch the lives of others, and to co-emerge a different kind of way of being in the world. And I love your work, and I love the fact that it's so complexity sensitive. I love the fact that you've helped thousands of people, and I love the fact that you've got that deep chord running through it. It's really beautiful.
Thank you.